Hello, hello. This is ADHD Wild Women, and I'm your host, Kat Ellinger. And today I want to talk about something that has been really impacting on me personally. Not just recently, but I've been feeling the strain recently, I guess, more than ever. But really asking this question, is social media good for us as neurodivergent people? Is social media good for us as people with ADHD? And this really ties into a wider thing that I want to cover. And I'm going to bring up a few ideas today, but I really think some of these ideas would benefit from extra episodes. So this might be a theme that I explore over the series of the next few episodes. But it really ties into, I think, my own personal relationship with this concept of wild. When I was in my teens, and especially in my 20s, I was the archetypical wild woman in a sense, in that my ADHD manifested from puberty onwards into this very physically hyperactive state, which I didn't experience that as a child, and I think that's true for a lot of women. It was this catalyst of puberty and the extra hormones that altered my ADHD. And of course, through the process of a lifetime, I'm 48 now, my ADHD changes. It's changed over time. But by the age of about 14, probably until my early 30s, I was very, very impulsive. I had absolutely no impulse control. I was very physically hyperactive, so I had to get out of the house a lot. I was like a caged animal if I was forced to stay in. But also a lot of the issues that I've come to recognize, like social anxiety, for example, which I understand now in my 40s. At the time, I didn't really understand it, didn't really have a name for it. And so I would overcompensate by binge drinking. And I think a lot of us have been there. We will self-medicate even when we don't really understand the problems that we're facing. And because I guess I felt odd or, struggle with certain things that I didn't really recognize in myself. I didn't really know what they were. I would overcompensate. ADHD, impulsivity, already no breaks. Stick a load of booze on the top of that and it is a nightmare. So, I was like this very over dramatic, always causing the scene. I'd be the one dancing on the tables. I was very promiscuous. I was very restless. And I guess this really ties into this concept of the quote unquote bad girl archetype. But it was a different type of wild. And then I hit my 30s and became very hypersensitive to a lot of things. I think I was just burnt out. I was tired of masking. I stopped drinking. I realized, I didn't want to do this to myself. And so throughout my 30s, it became a quieter period, not completely, but it was a lot quieter. And it was this period of introspection that really, really then developed in my 40s, especially post-diagnosis. And I became almost like a hermit. I'm still like that now. I realised a lot of things that I thought I liked, I didn't actually like. Like, I don't really like going out that much. I do have a lot of sensory issues because of my ADHD, and that's definitely a separate episode, which have become more pronounced as I've aged, especially like perimenopause has made my hypersensory sensitivity a lot more. And so, there's that. And there's also the thing that I realized in my early 40s, I'm not actually an extrovert, I'm an introvert. These extroverted qualities that I have, especially like being very talkative, being very excited when I'm into something, they really are the ADHD, this idea of driven by a motor. That's how it manifests generally for me. And outside of that, I do actually find company with people, even if it's very stimulating, there's only so much of it I can take. And so I would often buffer that by drinking, because then I would be oblivious to it. I'd be oblivious to the energy it took to withstand sensory things, the company of people. And I have had this pattern that I've only just recently recognized in my life, that for all the time I spent with a lot of people, I would also have to have a lot of alone time. I can't have people in my face all the time, which was obviously very difficult bringing up 5 kids. But this was necessary to me. I would often stay up very, very late into the night after the kids had gone to bed, just to have that time. You know, I know people talk about everyone needs me time, but this is something else. It's like I just cannot deal with peopling for any amount of time, which is crazy given that my job is as a film critic is being in the kind of public sphere, I guess. And that presents certain challenges, but at least with the internet, I can do it at a remove. I can do it on my own terms. So this concept of wildness, I feel this is key to really, well, this has been the case with me. It's definitely been my own personal journey, that as I shed that more erratic wildness, and that's not a judgment, that is not a judgment on my previous self, but it was more of a chaotic anarchy type of wildness, and that is still in me to a certain degree, but it comes out in different ways now. It manifests in different ways. But to truly connect to this idea of wildness as a form of femininity, a form of very valid femininity that has been written off more as a creative thing as well, I had to have and have to have this introspection, this time alone. And so the quieter I got, I became wilder in another way. And I don't know if this makes sense, but I became a lot more connected to myself, almost like a form of spiritual quest or a spiritual journey, I guess. But my life philosophy's changed. I came to know myself a lot better. I developed a lot more confidence, because even though I was loud and wild as a younger adult, or even as a teen, I had absolutely no confidence, no self-esteem, no confidence. A lot of it was masking, a lot of it was overcompensating. And so I would ask, was that truly me? Was that my authentic self? I'm not sure. But the quieter I've become, physically quieter, and the more I've respected my need for quiet as well, like this absolute need for periods of quiet, the more I've become connected to this idea of wild women as a spiritual thing, as something that is absolutely sacred, that is absolutely our right. And the more I've come to recognize the more systemic issues around my own life, which have affected my self-esteem, they have affected my confidence. So I become wilder but quieter. And I hope that makes sense. I really hope that makes sense and resonates with some people, because now my wildness manifests in a much more, I don't want to say contained way. I don't think I'd ever be that contained, but in a much more creative way, in a less destructive way when it comes to my own mental health. It's given me much more of a grasp on things like feminist politics, which I am absolutely passionate about. One of the reasons why I put this podcast together, but it manifests all over my work. And that kind of wildness has a certain potency, because it can become a tool to fight back towards this. And so it's a different kind of call of the wild, I guess you could say. But for me, it's been a very necessary one to really reevaluate my life and develop what I feel is a genuine sense of inner strength now. And I look back and I'm still on that journey. I'm not there completely. I don't have total self-esteem. I don't have total confidence. But I have, over the last 5 or 6 years, been able to drop a lot of the shame that I carried, get a stronger sense of my authentic self, my authentic voice. And I think that is so important for us as women with ADHD, that we have that voice, that we feel free to express that voice, because it is a very powerful voice, but one that is barely heard from, or has been barely heard from, because it reconstructs this idea of femininity and what a woman should be and shouldn't be. So that's my little opening premise to frame what I want to talk about with social media. And I do want to expand on this. I do want to talk about this element of quiet, the more spiritual side of that, I guess. I'm not talking in a God sense, but in this very intuitive way that I think that we do carry as women, this inner intuition, knowing your heart. To me, that feels like it has a spiritual element to it. This idea of truly being free, truly being authentic. It is spiritual in the sense that it's a philosophical element rather than I'm going to go and read the Bible element. So I just wanted to distinguish between that. But to go into social media, because this has been on my mind a lot lately, I've been very, very overwhelmed. I work as a freelance film critic. I also work in film production, in home video disc production. It's like I'm spinning all the plates. And on top of that, I have my son, who I've talked about before, who's on the autism spectrum. He's just started college. It's been a whole thing. The whole schedule got upended. Everything has been wild. Cost of living crushing us, all that additional stress. And so I found that my tolerance for what I can deal with externally has dropped considerably. I have literally no tolerance for people's shit on the internet anymore. And unfortunately, because of my job, there is an aspect to that where I do have to have a certain presence on social media. It's kind of expected these days. But I have changed the way that I use social media over the last couple of years, because to answer my own question, there are parts of the internet and social media that are amazing. Like all my journey with ADHD and this idea of embracing neurodiversity and all of this, all of my studies into this have come from the internet. We didn't have access to this information prior to the internet. There were odd books here and there, but they weren't exactly accessible in local libraries or whatever you needed to know about them. But now you can just slip on over to YouTube, you can follow people on Instagram, and you can get good quality information if you're discerning and really use social media as a tool for education in that way. And so there is a side to it that is good. I think it's broken down a lot of barriers. It has given us a voice. It's given us a voice to be able to speak. It's allowed me to connect to other, not just women, but people with ADHD and share these experiences to really get a handle on my own. It's given me access to what Jessica over at the amazing How to ADHD channel calls the ADHD tribe. For the first time in my life, I've met people online who also have ADHD, people that suspect they have ADHD or they're newly diagnosed or old timers. And that is a wonderful thing. But there is another part of social media that is not good for us. And I started to realize this a few years ago when I watched that documentary on Netflix, I think it was, called The Social Dilemma. And this documentary really asks the question, what purpose does social media serve in our society? Where does it come from? Whose interest does it serve? It wasn't really telling me anything that I didn't already know or kind of suspect, just from the way that social media personally affects me, my mental health, my mood, my time, for Christ's sake. But just somehow having it all laid out in front of me really made me take stock. And I think one of the biggest things in it was they talk about how social media was developed and how they use these game engineers, these game technicians, because games are by their nature addictive in that way. They give you a dopamine feed. and they get the balance just right, so it's not too much effort, but it's just feeding you like a bloody Pez machine, just to get you suckered in. So you're like, oh, just another 10 minutes. I'll just keep going, And I do love games, but I'm not a massive gamer these days. But in my 20s, I was totally like a PlayStation junkie. Another episode for another day, perhaps. Games to me are a nice little oasis these days to escape, but they do have that element, and obviously becoming aware of that within games was something that made me curb my own game usage. But there it is in social media. When I first started using Facebook, I was never a MySpacer. I never understood that. But I did get on Facebook because I wanted to keep in touch with family members and people that I hadn't seen for a long time. And it was a much simpler place there. It was just basically write a status and connect to friends or whatever. And it was a useful thing, but obviously it's morphed over the years, and the intention of social media is to keep you on that social media as much as it can, because while you're on that social media, you're being targeted ads. You're a customer. You might not be paying in money per se, but you are definitely paying with your time. And of course, having ADHD and having a lack of dopamine, finding a way to get dopamine in this very simple, easy way can be lethal for us. You have the scroll of doom where you cannot stop scrolling. There is no end to it. It is this endless thing. But I think the most nefarious part of this documentary was, the algorithm, it's completely amoral. It doesn't have this moral compass. It can be bought and sold to the highest bidder. But it will figure out what keeps you on social media, what keeps you there. And if you're like me and very into politics and very passionate about that, generally what my algorithm used to show me on Facebook specifically was political opinions I didn't agree with, because the algorithm learned that it could keep me on there for half a day arguing with people in a comment section on a newspaper article, say. And so that really made me take stock of my own relationship with social media. Is this serving me? Is this doing me any good? Or am I just losing whole days to pointlessness that are really impacting on my mental health? And I decided this is not good. I still need social media in a way, but this is not good. And so I changed. And I only clicked cute cat videos and my friends' posts about films that they'd loved and just things like that, art stuff. I love art, so I would click art stuff, and it changed my algorithm. I rarely see politics on my feed anymore. Obviously, Twitter is a little bit less and diluted. I cannot expose myself to more than 10 minutes of Twitter. And then I have to, I can't do it every day, because to me, it just feels like a pool of people screaming. And this brings me to another aspect of ADHD, which I want to elaborate on or expand or explore in further episodes. But two things really. One is our emotional state, in that a lot of us, and I feel awkward using the word empath, because a lot of people use the word empath now to describe themselves. You see a lot of these self-help spiritual gurus on YouTube who talk about being an empath. And a lot of the time they aren't empaths. It's just this weird I'm special thing. And you look at them and you think you're not actually an empath. But there isn't another word for it that I can think. But and to me, there is a kind of spiritual element to it as a pagan. But I think in more scientific terms, being an empath means being acutely in tune to other people's emotions, which seems like a complete conflict with the other parts of our ADHD, where we can be oblivious to certain things. And we can be forgetful, and we can sometimes blurt things out and come over as insensitive and not really caring, or even depending on your ADHD, it can be taken as narcissism. There's all sorts of parts of ADHD and they conflict. And obviously I'm talking about extremities. But I think for a lot of us, even if our masks are very extroverted and we're kind of oblivious to certain things, we are very hypersensitive as people. And so there's two aspects to that. One of my beautiful comorbids is what they call rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which the medical community kind of have an issue with recognizing, but they do recognize anecdotally that a lot of ADHD people have this exact experience. And that is, we can often perceive things that aren't slights, that aren't rejection, as total rejection. And we have a very extreme emotional response to that, which makes us look crazy to other people. I had no control over that in my 20s. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know that other people do not feel like that. As I got older, I started to mask it. I still feel it, but I've got a lot more control over how I react to it. And obviously being on social media and not having facial expressions or that intimate thing of a face-to-face conversation, we are more prone to getting into situations that will trigger this rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where we feel like someone is attacking us or rejecting us or whatever. And so obviously at the moment I'm going through this with my therapist because we're trying to reframe things together so that I can get more of a handle on it. I realize it's always going to be part of me, but it's just a case of reframing it and telling myself this is dysphoric, it is not real. And obviously that's difficult to do in the moment, and you're always in the moment on places like Facebook or Twitter. So a comment can ruin my entire day, or, just something, or someone's reaction to me can ruin my entire day. And I know that, sometimes people are just being assholes, and sometimes it is my rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Either way, that needs to be capped. My exposure to that needs to be capped. We are not designed to know this many people or be exposed to this many people. And we are essentially inviting them into our front room constantly at all times. When we get up, before we go to bed, we are in a room of people talking, and that's not good. It's not good for me. So there's that aspect of it. There's a dysphoric aspect, but there's also this aspect of being like empathic and or an empath. And I think the not spiritual explanation for this, more scientific one, would be that because we often get so many things wrong as children, a lot of us become very hypersensitive to other people's moods as we are trying to really grasp, situations and trying to get one step ahead of people, trying to minimize getting told off, getting into trouble. And so I think a lot of us become very, very sensitive. And we develop almost like a sixth sense to other people's emotional thing. And also there's that thing that we have emotional deregulation. So we also have a tendency to absorb other people's energy, other people's moods. And that's certainly been the case for me. If I walk into a room and everyone's on a downer, I instantly feel myself come down. If I'm around people that are very joyous and happy, it sends me off onto a fucking high, because obviously mine is always more. It's this heightened emotion. And so one thing I've found with social media is that doesn't just happen to me when I'm physically with people. I get it from social media. And obviously the last several years we've been in a very tumultuous political climate where people are raging. They're raging for, I'm not going to get into a political thing, but they are raging and raging and raging. And I found being around that makes me feel physically ill. It really, really impacts on my mental health in so many ways. I find it draining. It's just so draining of energy, even if I'm not engaged in it, just to be around it. And so after watching The Social Dilemma and taking all of this in mind, I started to become... I really don't like the word mindful. I think we need a better word. But I did start to become much more mindful as much as I can on any given day. Obviously, there are days when my impulse control is going to be a bit more out. And it's just being more aware of that. I guess having more self-awareness to separate me from it being the social media culture, to become more aware that, this is not what I want to be exposed to. So trying to override this dopamine seeking urge to mindlessly scroll, get into drama, get into arguments, read things that annoy me, because these things do feed my dopamine like nothing else, and they are designed to. And I guess knowing they're designed to do that to you, to anyone, right? Not just someone with ADHD. So they're lethal to us. They're designed to hook people in who aren't short of dopamine. What the hell are they going to do to us? But being much more conscious that this is a system, it's a framework. It is designed to do this, and it is designed to do this for a capitalist concern, to make us consumers, to milk our information, not in a conspiracy theory way, but to target us with things, and they want to keep us on there as much as they can, because more targets, they can keep targeting you. And, I find that kind of disgusting when you think about it in that term, when you think, this is just a thing that is there to stay in touch with people, but it's become so much more. It's not that anymore. And so is social media good for us? Not in that way. I think just from a personal perspective, and I'm feeling it so much now, just because of my own personal frustrations with the cost of living crisis in the UK and the fact I still live hand to mouth. And so to see crap on social media, of course, it's going to affect my mood. Being around people that are also, in a deep depression or struggling, it affects me so much because I feel it. I feel their pain and I absorb it, and it just adds to my own and its whole thing. So now I'm very controlled over how I engage with social media, and I just try and keep that in mind. And it's not always going to work because it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. And social media is really, fighting us in a way for our attention. But it's just this case of valuing that attention and telling myself it could be better spent elsewhere. Even just going off and playing a game on my own in peace is a better way to get dopamine than this. So I just wanted to talk about that today, really, especially with like the holiday season coming up and just everything being out of whack. Our schedules are out of whack. Everything's turned up to 11. There's panic. There's general panic in the air. Not a lot of good cheer going on. And so I found it's been really impacting me lately. And I've been just I can't bring myself to do the whole deactivate the thing. I've tried so many times. I've taken the apps off my phone. I've given myself these ridiculous rules that you can only touch it between 6 and 7 p.m. when you've completed 4 pieces of work. It doesn't work. I'm trying to take more breaks from it and trying to not look at it so much, and also trying to look at what I'm putting into social media as well. How is my use of social media? What purpose does it serve? Is it helpful to anyone? Because I think putting things in that way as well can be really helpful. And also trying to connect more in ADHD groups to other women and connect to their threads if I do go on there, and just trying to be part of this more shared experience. I found that's helped as well. Just having a plan, why am I going on Facebook today? I'm going to check out the ADHD women groups. I'm going to check out some of my friends, having that more controlled way. And I did find, although I still use it a lot on my phone, but I did find there's a free app called Purity. There's a couple of them actually, if you Google them, but I use one called Purity where you can actually, it overrides the algorithm and you can actually filter certain things out of your feed. I chose to not have a feed on there at one point. I would just physically go to friends' pages, and it was a bit of a faff, but when I was in a real crisis point at one time, I had to do that. I just had to do that. And I think it's a case of really protecting ourselves and really just accepting and acknowledging that this can have a real effect on us. You know, it can be bad for us. And so we do need to protect ourselves. We need to be kind as well. And I won't go into this because I'm at the end of the episode now. But even like analysing our own comments that we've made. Oh my God, I've spent hours. I've been haunted at 4 a.m. when I'm trying to sleep by something I said on Facebook 6 months ago. You know, that's another whole thing. That would be a whole episode of that. Shit I said on Facebook, 2 years ago that still haunts me, and I guess that is really part of rejection sensitivity dysphoria as well. But just I get this acute hypersensitivity to how we are perceived. And I don't mask as much on there now as I do. I'm quite open about my own ADHD. And again, that's been a good thing for me because it has helped free me from shame about my diagnosis and things like that. And now I can just talk about it and connect with other people, and that's good. But yeah, there's parts of social media that are not good, and we do need quiet, even though we're not thought of stereotypically as quiet people. A lot of us are actually quiet people, and we do need quiet, a different type of quiet. So a friend of mine who's also neurodivergent, she actually took an entire break from Facebook and Twitter, and her comment to me really sums it up. She said, walking away, I said, was it hard? And she said it was like taking off a pair of headphones that was playing music I don't very much care for. And I guess it is like, but I'm not saying delete your social media. I can't do that. What I'm trying to do is alter the volume on those headphones, I guess, and trying to get a mixed track that is more suited to me. So that's the end of this episode. I'll be back before Christmas to talk about this more as the season ramps up to pure chaos. No doubt I'll feel like I need to check in with more quiet, more calm. But just my thoughts for today, and I'd love to hear from others. How do you feel social media affects you? Until next time, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.